investment. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Before we get started, quick reminder, like always, this is not financial advice. We're just looking at information, news, investment, patterns, and possibilities surrounding Iraq and its currency. Nothing in this video should be taken as a prediction of dates or rates. Investment, because nobody truly knows when or how something like that could happen. What we do here is connect the dots and talk through the scenarios together. All right, investment. So today we need to talk about something that a lot of people might have missed. Investment, and it's honestly pretty interesting if you've been following the Iraqi Dinar story for a while, because recently Iraq's prime minister made comments that investment on the surface might seem normal political talk, but when you slow down and actually look at the wording, the timing, investment, and the context, it feels like the narrative around the Iraqi dinar is quietly shifting. Now, I want you guys to think back for a second. For years, investment. When Iraqi officials talked about their currency, the conversation usually focused on stability. They talked about protecting the exchange rate. Investment. They talked about keeping inflation down. They talked about defending the current value of the dinar against the US dollar. And that made sense. Iraq has spent a long time rebuilding after war, sanctions, corruption issues, and economic instability. The Central Bank of Iraq had one main mission: stabilize the currency and rebuild trust. But lately, the tone has started to change, not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly. And sometimes the biggest signals are the quiet ones. So here's what caught people's attention. The Prime Minister recently spoke about Iraq's economic future: investment. And instead of focusing only on defending the current exchange rate, he began emphasizing something different: investment, strengthening the value of the Iraqi dinar through economic reform, investment, and independence from external pressures. Now, that wording might sound simple: investment. But in the world of currencies, wording matters a lot, because when a government starts talking about strengthening its currency rather than just stabilizing it, investment, that tells you they may believe the underlying fundamentals are improving. And this is where things get interesting. Over the past few years, investment, Iraq has been slowly transforming its financial system. We've seen banking reforms. We've seen anti-corruption efforts. We've seen new digital payment systems. Investment. We've seen increased oil revenues flowing into government accounts, and we've seen Iraq working closely with international institutions to modernize its economy. Investment. Now think about this from a big picture perspective. Investment. A country usually doesn't talk about strengthening its currency unless it believes its economy is capable of supporting that strength. Investment. If the economic foundation isn't there, any attempt to strengthen a currency could cause major problems like inflation spikes, trade imbalances, investment, or financial instability. But Iraq seems to be positioning itself differently now, and the Prime Minister's comments appear to reflect that shift. Another thing that stood out was how the conversation around the US dollar inside Iraq has evolved. For a long time, Iraq's markets relied heavily on dollars. Investment. People use dollars for large purchases. Businesses preferred dollars for international trade. Investment. And a lot of everyday transactions in Iraq were influenced by dollar availability. But recently, investment. The government and the central bank have been pushing strongly toward increasing the use of the Iraqi dinar inside the country. Investment. They've been limiting dollar access in certain markets. They've been tightening regulations on foreign currency transfers. Investment. They've been encouraging banks and businesses to settle transactions in dinar instead of dollars. Now, why would they do that? Well, investment. If you're trying to strengthen your national currency, the first step is making sure your own country actually uses it. Think of it like this. Investment. Imagine trying to increase the value of a currency while most of your population prefers to use another one. That would be extremely difficult. Investment, but if you gradually transition your economy so that most transactions happen in the local currency, you start building real demand for it. Investment. Demand is what gives a currency strength, and Iraq appears to be working on exactly that. The Prime Minister didn't say anything about sudden currency changes. Investment. He didn't mention exchange rates. He didn't make dramatic announcements. Instead, he talked about economic sovereignty, and that phrase is very important. Investment. Economic sovereignty basically means a country has control over its financial system, its banking operations, and its monetary policy without heavy outside influence. Investment. For a country like Iraq, which has spent years dealing with sanctions, oversight, and international pressure, that's a big deal. Investment. It suggests they want their currency and financial system to stand on their own. Now let's talk about something else that might connect to all of this: foreign investment. Over the past year, Iraq has been aggressively inviting international companies to invest in its infrastructure, energy sector investment and development projects. We're talking about major oil agreements. We're talking about power grid expansions, investment. We're talking about transportation corridors and trade routes connecting Iraq to neighboring regions. And investors care deeply about one thing: currency stability. As if a country's currency is weak, unstable, or unpredictable, it scares away long-term investment. But if investors believe a currency is stable, investment, or even potentially strengthening, it creates confidence. Confidence attracts capital, and capital strengthens economies. Investment. So when the Prime Minister talks about strengthening the dinar through economic development, that message isn't just for Iraqi citizens. Investment. It's also for international investors. It tells them Iraq believes its economy is entering a new phase. Now again, that doesn't mean an overnight change is coming. These things usually happen slowly. Currencies move based on long-term fundamentals, policy decisions, and economic growth. Investment. But narrative shifts are often the first signal that governments are preparing for the next stage of their economic strategy. Investment. And that's why people watching the Iraqi Dinar story are paying attention to comments like these, because they represent a change in tone. Investment. Instead of simply defending the current system, Iraq's leadership is starting to talk about the future strength of their currency. Investment. And when leaders start speaking differently, it usually means policy discussions behind the scenes may already be evolving. Investment. Now I want you guys to imagine a scenario for a second. Let's say Iraq continues increasing oil production. Let's say infrastructure projects begin boosting trade. Then let's say foreign investors start pouring billions into energy, logistics, and manufacturing. Investment. And let's say the banking system continues modernizing with digital payments and stronger regulations. If all of that happens over the next several years, investment, what would that mean for the Iraqi dinar? Well, historically speaking, countries with strong exports, growing economies, investment, and improving financial systems often see their currencies gradually strengthen, not overnight, but gradually. Investment. And that's exactly why comments from the Prime Minister are being analyzed so closely right now, because they hint at the direction Iraq believes it's heading. Investment. And when you combine that with the reforms happening across the banking sector, the push to reduce dollar dependence, and the increasing focus on economic sovereignty, investment, you start to see a bigger picture forming. Now again, none of this guarantees anything. Investment. But it does show that Iraq's leadership is beginning to frame the dinar not just as a currency that needs protection. Investment. Well, but potentially as a currency that could become stronger as the country's economy evolves. Investment. And that shift in narrative is something that dinar watchers around the world have been waiting to hear for a very long time. Before we continue, investment. Just a quick reminder again, this is not financial advice. We're simply looking at information, trends, and possibilities surrounding Iraq and its currency. Investment. No one here is giving dates or rates, and nobody outside the central bank truly knows what decisions could happen in the future. This channel is about discussion, observation, and connecting the dots. Now, where we left off, we were talking about how Iraq's Prime Minister seems to be quietly shifting the narrative around the Iraqi dinar, not through dramatic announcements, investment, not through big headlines, but through subtle changes in how Iraq talks about its economy and its currency. And when you really start digging into it, investment, you begin to realize something interesting. The shift may not just be about the dinar itself. Investment, it might actually be about Iraq preparing its entire financial system for a completely different level of global interaction. Investment. Let's talk about the banking system for a minute. For years, Iraq's banking sector has been considered one of the weakest parts of its economy. Investment. A lot of Iraqi citizens didn't even trust banks. Many people preferred holding physical cash instead of depositing money into financial institutions. Investment. And when that happens, it creates a huge problem for any country trying to build a modern economy, because modern economies rely heavily on banks. Banks allow loans, businesses. Banks process international transactions. Banks connect countries to the global financial system. Without strong banks, investment, it becomes extremely difficult for a currency to gain international credibility, and Iraq knows that. That's why over the last few years, investment. The Central Bank of Iraq has been working aggressively to modernize the entire banking structure. They've been implementing new digital payment systems. Investment. They've been restructuring state-owned banks. They've been cracking down on corruption and money laundering. Investment. They've been introducing international compliance standards that align with global financial institutions. Now, this might sound boring at first, investment, but it's actually one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because a currency cannot grow stronger globally if the banking system behind it isn't trusted. Investment. Think about it this way: when international companies invest in a country, they need reliable financial channels. They need to move money safely. Investment. They need clear regulations. They need transparency. If those things don't exist, investors stay away. But if a country begins fixing those weaknesses, investment, suddenly the entire financial environment becomes more attractive. And that's exactly what Iraq appears to be doing. Investment. Another thing that's been happening quietly is Iraq's push toward electronic payments. Now, this might seem like a small change, but it's actually a huge shift. Investment. Historically, Iraq has been a very cash-heavy society. People paid for things with physical dinar notes. Businesses handled transactions with stacks of currency. Investment. And a large portion of the economy operated outside the official banking system. But the government has been working to change that. Investment. They've been encouraging citizens to use electronic payment cards. They've introduced mobile payment platforms. Investment. Government salaries are increasingly being distributed through bank accounts instead of physical cash. And even everyday purchases in some cities are slowly shifting toward digital transactions. Why does that matter? Because digital transactions bring transparency. Investment. When money moves through banks instead of under the table, governments can track economic activity much more accurately. That helps reduce corruption. Investment. It increases tax revenue, and it strengthens financial oversight. All of those things improve the credibility of a country's financial system. And once again, investment, credibility is everything when it comes to currencies. Now, let's step back for a moment and look at the global picture, because Iraq isn't operating in isolation. Investment. The world is changing rapidly right now. Energy markets are shifting. Trade routes are evolving. Countries are forming new economic alliances. Investment. And Iraq sits in a very strategic geographic location right in the middle of major global trade corridors. Investment. This is something Iraq's leadership has been talking about more and more. The country wants to transform itself into a major economic hub connecting Asia, investment, the Middle East, and Europe. Investment. One of the biggest projects connected to that vision is the development of transportation corridors that would move goods through Iraq much faster than traditional shipping routes. Investment. Railways, highways, ports, logistics centers, all of these projects are designed to turn Iraq into a gateway for international trade. Investment. Now imagine the impact that could have on the Iraqi economy. If goods start flowing through Iraq in massive volumes, the country would generate revenue not just from oil, investment, but from trade itself. That would diversify Iraq's economy. And when an economy diversifies, it often strengthens its national currency over time. Oil is powerful. Investment. But relying on a single resource can make a currency vulnerable to price swings. Diversified economies tend to produce more stable and resilient currencies. Investment. And Iraq seems to be aiming for exactly that. Now, here's another angle that a lot of people might not be thinking about: confidence. Investment. Currencies are heavily influenced by perception. If investors believe a country's economy is improving, confidence grows. When confidence grows, investment increases. When investment increases, economic activity expands, and that creates upward pressure on the currency over time. But confidence doesn't appear overnight. Investment, it builds slowly through reforms, stability, and leadership messaging. And leadership messaging matters more than people sometimes realize. Investment. When a prime minister begins talking about economic sovereignty, financial reform, and strengthening the national currency, investment, that message travels far beyond Iraq's borders. International banks hear it, global investors hear it, economic analysts hear it. Investment. And they start evaluating whether the country is entering a new stage of development. Now again, this doesn't mean some sudden currency event is guaranteed. Investment. But narrative shifts are often early indicators that a government sees things moving in a different direction. Investment. And when Iraq's prime minister begins framing the dinar as a symbol of economic strength rather than just stability, that's something worth paying attention to. Investment. There's also another interesting development happening behind the scenes, and that's Iraq's growing effort to assert more control over its own financial destiny. Investment. For many years, Iraq's monetary system has been closely monitored by international institutions. Investment. That oversight helps stabilize the country after years of conflict and sanctions. But as Iraq's financial institutions mature, investment. The country is gradually gaining more independence in how it manages its economy. The central bank has been improving its regulatory framework. Investment. They've been building foreign currency reserves. They've been implementing systems designed to prevent illegal dollar transfers. Investment. All of these steps strengthen Iraq's ability to manage its own currency policies, and when a country becomes confident in its financial controls, investment, it opens the door to broader monetary flexibility in the future. Now, I'm not saying that means a specific change is coming, but historically speaking, investment. Countries that strengthen their financial infrastructure eventually gain more options in how they manage their exchange rates. Investment. They can defend their currency more effectively, they can adjust policies when needed, and they can participate more actively in the global financial system. Investment. And that might be part of the long-term vision Iraq's leadership is hinting at. Investment. Because when the Prime Minister talks about strengthening the dinar and achieving economic sovereignty, investment, it suggests Iraq wants its currency to reflect the true potential of its economy rather than simply remaining fixed in place forever. Investment. And if that's the direction Iraq is heading, then the quiet narrative shift we're seeing right now could be the early stage of a much larger economic transformation.